I do want to go to the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I think of college students who go off to study abroad, like my kids did, like
Yeah.
20-year-old Amanda did,
Yeah.
thinking of all the possibilities without ever imagining for a moment
Yeah.
that what happened to you could have even happened to you. Do you ever think about that? About what your expectations
Uh,
were at the time?
yeah, I look back on 20-year-old Amanda fairly often because in a lot of ways we're exactly the same person, and in very, very big ways we're not, because I went to Italy with bright eyes and without any sense of fear or suspicion. I absolutely had been privileged to grow up in a very safe environment, and I had every reason to think that this was going to be the best experience of my life. So
It started out that way.
it started out that way. The first several weeks that I was in Perugia, I was having the time of my life, getting to know my roommates, my classmates. Everyone was so kind to me, really welcoming towards me. And as much as like there were challenges, right? Like just being alone in a new place and trying to figure out where you are and what's going on, and totally different language, lots of different cultures mixing around that I wasn't totally familiar with. So there, like little bumps in the road, but nothing that like I was having the time of my life. And then completely out of the blue, the worst possible thing happened. And it really did feel like it was out of the blue. No one saw that coming.
And what I find fascinating about your story is that your instinct was to go to the police, to help them in any way that you could, because this roommate was not just a roommate, it was your friend.
Yeah. Thank
And
you
so
for
that's what
saying
you
that.
did.
Yeah. A lot of people forget that she was also my friend. Like, I mean, anyone who studied abroad sort of knows what those first few weeks are like when you are just plopped in the middle of nowhere and all of these new people are your people, and you make these really strong connections really quickly. I mean, Raffaele was my person, Meredith was my person, my other two Italian roommates were my people. We really just very quickly started caring about each other because we were all each other that we had,
Right, right.
and I think people to this day forget that that day that I came home, it wasn't just that like I lost my home and a few days later I lost my freedom. Like that day I lost my friend, and I lost also my innocence in a way, because I the worst thing that I thought could happen to any of us while we were studying abroad was that we would get sick or that our passports would be stolen. I in no way thought that any of us could be in danger and that we could be at home. Meredith was at home when she was raped and murdered. And it was shocking. It shocked me so deeply to my core that I didn't really, at the very beginning, even know what to think or to do. So I just did what I was told.
And what most 20-year-olds would do, especially American kids, you would go and cooperate with the police and you would tell them everything that you know.
Yeah.
And this is what you did. And it got flipped completely upside down.
Yeah.
And so walk us through what happened that ended up with you in jail, waiting for trial for a year, and then actually being convicted and in prison, all starting with you wanting to help the police and your
Yeah.
interrogation.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, this case has become so muddied in the world because I mean, it lasted a year, right? Like my first trial lasted an entire year, and they brought a million witnesses, and there was so many discussions about, forensic experts and all of this. But so much of what really impacted this case happened within a few days prior to my arrest. And that was when the police were putting together their idea of what had happened in this case without any forensic evidence available to them. They were questioning all of the different people who were close to the house, anyone who lived with us, anyone who was friends with us, anyone who had access to our home. And they, unbeknownst to me, they were focusing in on me. I was the only person who had her cell phone tapped by the police. I was questioned for 53 hours over 5 days, way more than anyone else. But of course, I didn't know this. I had no idea. All I knew was that I was called into the police office, and what they told me was that I was their most important witness, that I was the one who was closest to Meredith and could therefore provide the police with the most important information that could potentially lead to her killer. And they really absolutely said that to me. Like, you are so important to this case. We need you. Rack your mind, anything, the odd glance from somebody at the bar, anybody who said a weird thing about Meredith one time. And I did. I racked my brain just day after day, going back to the police office, giving them everything I possibly could, and then going, I didn't even have a home to go back to. I was in my boyfriend of 5 days apartment, just spending the rest of the night just trying to rack my brain of anything I might have forgotten. And it was an utterly surreal experience, but truly, like, I think the thing that made me the most vulnerable, and that makes any innocent person most vulnerable, was that I assumed that my innocence was obvious. Like, at no point did I at all think that the police were suspecting me. And so when they were getting even frustrated with me, like, I could tell, like, some of them would be sort of short with me, or didn't even seem to like me. And I just assumed that they were under a lot of pressure, and that they were scared too, because all of a sudden, out of the blue, there might have been a serial killer in the city. And that's as far as we knew, it could have been something really horrible like that. And so I just chalked it up to the authorities are under a lot of pressure. My Italian is not very good, so maybe what I'm saying is confusing to them, and I just have to work harder to be better at speaking Italian. And I blamed myself in a lot of ways for whenever there were, blips and moments of uncomfortability or misunderstanding. And that all ended up in this final interrogation, where I didn't know, again, that I was even being interrogated. I was not informed that I was a suspect. And I was accused of not committing this crime against my friend, but of knowing something that I wasn't sharing with them. They were utterly convinced that I was withholding important information about what happened to Meredith. And as much as I told them that I had given them everything I possibly knew, they just wouldn't believe me, and it escalated. And they started lying to me. They told me that my boyfriend said I wasn't with him that night. They lied to me and told me that they had proof that I was at my house when I was actually at Raffaele's house. And I did not know, as an innocent person, what to make of this. I was utterly terrified. I was absolutely confused. And it wasn't until this fake interpreter was brought in, who was actually a police officer, came in and told me a story about how she had been in this terrible car accident, and she didn't remember anything from her car accident. She was just driving along, and then she woke up in the hospital. And she said, "That's what happened to you, Amanda. You went through something so horrible that you don't even remember it. But here's the thing. We need you to remember what we know you need to remember right now, or you're never going to see your family again." And so in that environment, I tried to imagine something else that could have happened, because that's what they were asking me to do. I believed them at a certain point that I must have amnesia, that I must be scared and broken, because I felt scared and broken. And they got me to sign statements that implicated myself and others in a crime that we had nothing to do with, simply because they wanted to arrest someone as soon as possible. And all of that, everything that happened in those 5 days, impacted how the case went forward into the future. They had a confession. They got what they wanted, a confession. And then everything else, all of their forensic work, all of their witness work, all of that assumed the confession and built a case from there. And that's, like, for me now, having worked having looked at other cases and helped and advocated for other cases and looked into the reality of how innocent people end up put into prison, the thing that bothers me the most is how innocent people are coerced into implicating themselves and how much that impacts a case. It doesn't, like, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen the forensic evidence utterly exonerates a person, but because they have a confession, the jury thinks, well, they must have done it. And it absolutely impacts the course of justice. And I think that the thing that's very scary about that is just the innocent person on the street, every one of us day to day, does not know what happens in an interrogation. We think we know. We've seen the movies. We watch TV shows. We think we know what the police do and what they're allowed to do. But when I tell any person on the street, you know that police are allowed to lie to you, they think, what? The police are the good guys. Why would they lie to you in an interrogation room? And, well, the reason is because it's a very effective tool to getting people to confess, whether they're guilty or innocent. And that's, I think, the thing that when I advocate for reform, and I advocate for reform across the board, but the one that's closest to me in my heart is what happens in the interrogation room, particularly around lying and around the lack of transparency that we don't have when we're judging what happens inside of interrogation room.
Can you tell us more about what the coercion looked like in your case too? Because at one point you talked about being hit.
Yeah.
And the hours at which they would not let you sleep.
Yes. So my final interrogation took place overnight, but that was just the tip of the iceberg of this entire interrogation experience. And what the police in Italy will say is that they were never interrogating me at all. They were only interviewing me. That's one of those like little loopholes that law enforcement has where they say, okay, we're only questioning you. We're not interrogating you. You're not a suspect. So no, you're not entitled to certain rights that would protect you as an innocent person. So I've been going through days of being questioned, brought back to the crime scene, asked to like dig through cutlery drawers to look for knives that could have been used to murder Meredith. Like I was being put through this entire experience with no support, with no family, no friend, like no lawyer, no counsel at all. And then finally I'm brought in the middle of the night and interrogated. When I ask if I need an attorney, they tell me no, that would mean that I don't want to cooperate with them, and so I should not have an attorney. When I tell them that I'm tired and I want to talk to my mom, they say I can't call my mom, I can't talk to her. They shut the door to this room, and I assume that I'm not allowed to leave. They, of course, today say, well, she could have just gotten up and left at any point. But if I'm surrounded by police officers in a room with the door closed, that no way do I feel like I have control of the situation. And I was questioned over and over again, the same questions over and over. Like I was told that the answers that I was giving them were not good enough, that either they didn't understand or that they wanted to go back because they thought I was wrong. And eventually they told me, what you're saying is wrong. Either you're lying to us or you have amnesia. Either you're lying to us and covering up for the murderer, or you're this innocent victim who just blacked out and doesn't know what the truth is. So we're going to get the truth out of you, whether we have to beat it out of you or not. And they asked me to imagine what the truth was. They told me that everything that I thought I remembered about the night that I was spending with Raffaele, the night that Meredith was murdered, that everything I remembered was obviously wrong. So I had made up memories about what really happened that night. And that was because I blacked them out. I had repressed them. And I needed to unlock my repressed memories of what actually happened. So they asked me to imagine them. And it sounds crazy. It sounds like if you were in that situation, like obviously that's crazy, but I had just spent days speaking to them with no help whatsoever. This was the middle of the night. I was sleep deprived. I was scared, and I trusted the police. These are the people who I was depending upon for my own safety, not just for, they're doing the right thing for Meredith, but also I didn't have a home anymore. There was a killer on the loose. My family was worried that our house had been targeted by a specific murderer who might be coming after every one of us. So I was relying, and I was dependent upon these police officers. And so to have them tell me that I was wrong, the only thing I could think to do as a 20-year-old kid was to believe them and to try to just give them what they wanted. So I tried to imagine memories that I didn't have.
And then they actually hit you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When I didn't remember correctly, they would hit me in the back of the head. And, not enough to leave a mark, but enough to startle me. And enough to convey to me that when I gave them something that they didn't like, they would not accept it.
Wow. Based on what happened with you, why do you want to help others?
I mean, besides the fact that I would never wish that experience upon anyone else. When I first came home, I didn't know how common wrongful convictions were. I honestly thought that maybe I was alone in the world. I especially was afraid that no one would ever understand what had happened in my interrogation. I blamed myself in so many ways because I couldn't speak the language, because I didn't stand up for myself, all of the ways that I could blame myself because the whole world was blaming me anyway. I sort of internalized a lot of that self-blame, but I also had never heard stories of people who had been coerced. You hear stories about people being horribly beaten or tortured with like car batteries and things like that, but that's not what happened to me. It was more of a psychological struggle between me and the police that I lost. And so I didn't know if anyone would ever understand me. And it wasn't until I went to my first ever Innocence Network conference that I walked into a room full of hundreds of people who had been through the exact same experience as me. And they came up to me and told me that I didn't have to explain a thing to them because they already knew. Like, the relief that swept over me in that moment was life-changing. And I wanted to share that relief with others. And I understood that my case was a little unusual because it became international headlines for a decade. And when I asked myself, what role can I possibly have in this world anymore as the girl who was accused of murder, I thought, well, one thing I can do is try to share this new information and this new perspective that I gained from this experience with others. Because when I grew up, none of this was ever on my radar. And I think a lot of people are like that. I'm like a lot of people out there in the world who think the criminal justice system is really straightforward. It's very black and white.
It can't happen here.
It can't happen to me. It can't happen here. And that's just not true. So without like trying to catastrophize and say that the sky is falling, like, there are real problems that fortunately there are solutions to. It's not like this is some inevitability. People don't inevitably become wrongfully convicted. It's because we've been applying the tools of our justice system without honing them to deal with the problems that arise that were not intended.
Is that a lot of people, knowing what you have been through, would say, why doesn't she just want to just close the door on that, put it behind her, look ahead, move forward, because it's just so incredibly painful what you have been through, clearly. So why is it something that you feel you still need to talk about? And how does that benefit you, not just other people?
I have found that first of all, the best way to grapple with trauma, instead of to looking away from it, is to look directly at it. That has been, I think anybody in the therapy field would argue that instead of just looking away, you look at what hurts. And especially if you're in a place where you can process that for yourself, so come to terms with it, turn it into an opportunity for growth as a human being instead of keeping it as a grievance and a hindrance to who you are as a human being now, carrying it around like a ball and chain. Like, you don't want to do that. So first of all, like, it's very important for me just personally to have the catharsis of looking at what happened directly and not pretending that it didn't happen, not pretending that I'm still not impacted by it today, that I still have deep trauma responses that arise from when I feel like authority figures are lying to me. Like that, I get a fear response when that happens. So I'm still processing my own trauma. But on top of that, I have found that by sharing my perspective about what happened, I am empowering other people to not find themselves in the situation I was in. And I'm working to help try to fix the situation so that people in the future no longer have to face this exact mistake that ultimately arose from the choices that police made. And so it's a dual thing that happens where I am personally benefiting from processing my experience aloud and openly and publicly. And on the other side, I've found that a lot of people have reached out to me, even those who have never been interrogated before, but who have felt like they have been in positions where they were told or treated as if they were something that they were not. And gaslighting is a huge issue that affects all of us ultimately. And I think that the only way that we can come up with solutions to these problems is to look at them in the face.
And then layer on top of that, you're a mother now. And I'm wondering if that at all plays a role in your involvement in trying to change the future so that what happened to you can't happen to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I had this incredible experience when my daughter was first born. I was afraid going up to giving birth to her of how the world was going to treat her because she was my daughter. And I was afraid that in the way that the worst experience of my life continues to be a very defining part of my life, and not just because I choose to speak about it, but because the rest of the world, that's the only thing they ever know about me. So anywhere I go, anything I do is filtered through the lens of having gone through this traumatic, tragic experience. I was afraid that she was going to be living with that shadow over her as well. And as soon as she was born, the thing that really hit me, though, was what it must have felt like to be my mom, going through everything that I was going through, and how much my mom would have given to trade places with me at any point, but she couldn't. And how many parents find themselves in that situation, just utterly powerless to help their kids as they're going through the torture of the justice system. And I have felt more compelled than ever to try to change things just to make it so that it's fair and that it works. It's that simple, just to protect those who deserve to be protected. And I hope that by the time my children are 20 years old and asking to go study abroad, I can feel like the world is a little bit smarter and a little bit safer than it was when I went and studied abroad.
It is so incredibly true that we don't realize how much our parents love us until we actually have our own children, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
shocking. It's so shocking.
I can totally understand every word you were saying, being a mother myself, because you just don't know how much your parents do for you until you are a parent and doing it for your own.
And I'm thinking about, like, my mom was on her way to Italy to support me during that interrogation. Like, I was interrogated in the middle of the night because the police knew that my mom was on a plane to Italy. They knew that she was going to arrive the very next day and I would have her support. And so it was their last chance to have me at my most vulnerable. And I'm thinking about how my mom landed, like she got on a plane in Italy, having talked to me on the phone, we were going to see each other, and then she landed and I was in jail. And in that in-between time was when I was interrogated. And what that must have been like for her, and how much to this day she wonders, like, what if? And asks herself, I didn't get there fast enough.
I have never actually heard you share that part of that story. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So they took advantage of you in every way possible, in terms of not allowing you to have the support that you should have had, that you would have thought one would have. You had none of that. Incredible. Wow. I was on the news desk on this end when we were broadcasting live, watching you in Perugia get out of prison.
Was it as crazy here as it was there? Because people were going nuts over there, but in a bad way.
I don't know about the energy around it, but I remember looking at you and wondering what it was like to finally be free.
Oh. Well, what I can say is I walked into that courtroom not knowing what to expect. Because after you walk into a courtroom as an innocent person and they find you guilty and they sentence you to 26 years in prison, you don't know what to believe anymore, and you don't know what you can count on anymore. And so I went into that courtroom afraid to hope. And when that verdict came down and I was acquitted and I was released, relief washed over me, but also like this built up hope that I couldn't help but feel, but was sort of repressing, just exploded out of me. And that was the crying. I was crying uncontrollably, to the extent that the guards who took me out of the room, as I got out of the room, they were trying to explain to me that I had won, that I was acquitted. They thought that I had misunderstood the verdict.
Wow.
And so they explained.
That wasn't it.
Yeah, no, I had been so afraid to hope. And then to have, to know that I was going home was an incredible feeling. And then, of course, I went back to the prison where the entire, it had been broadcast on live TV in Italy. So everyone in the prison knew about it. And everyone was screaming outside of their windows, banging pots and pans. I was given very little time to go back to my cell to gather a few of my essential things and to say goodbye, to like run up and down this hallway where I had spent the last 4 years of my life, to say goodbye to these women that I was imprisoned with, and then brought out to a car, and then promptly got into a car chase where paparazzi were chasing us and trying to get to a safe house and then trying to get home. So in a way, it was the most incredible relief to be free. Mm-hmm. And in another way, I was not free the way I always hoped that I would be. Because here I was entering a world where I wasn't just an anonymous student anymore. I was the girl accused of murder. And I have slowly come to realize that I'm forever the girl who was accused of murder. And that there's likely nothing I will ever accomplish in my life that will come to define me more than having been accused of something that I didn't do. That isn't to say that I've just given up hope of doing things, obviously. Like I've absolutely embraced my freedom and the opportunities that are unfolding in my life today that I do not take for granted. And I'm rebuilding my life step by step. And, And I'm accepting the reality of how this huge case has come to impact my life, and I'm not letting it stop me from doing what I think is right.
And I just think you're going to have to explain that to your kids, that this thing happened to you.
Yeah, there's going to be a conversation or two. Although, like, it's interesting because it's not like they're going to be totally isolated from it. Like, I'm very much involved in the Innocence community, in the Innocence network. So in a way, I'm immersing my children from a young age in this reality. And I've already decided that I'm going to follow their lead about how much they want to know about it. I'm absolutely going to answer any and all questions they have about it. And I'm sure they will. Once they get older, they're going to be like, hey, Mom, how come we keep going to this conference every year? and how come you keep like talking about this like crazy story? What is this crazy story? It's going to be interesting.
Let's talk about fully clearing your name.
Yes.
This slander charge.
Yes.
Walk us through that, because you were completely absolved of killing Meredith. You were free, but this slander conviction has been hanging over your head all this time.
Yes. So I was definitively convicted of slander for signing those statements during my interrogation. And when I was acquitted, they said that 3 of the 4 years that I spent in prison were rightfully served for having committed slander, for having voluntarily, falsely confessed. And I have fought against that charge, but ultimately I remain wrongly convicted of it, or I had remained wrongly convicted of it until very, very recently. And I came back home thinking that I had no chance to really overturn that wrongful conviction. It was just going to hover over me for the rest of my life. And then the Italy Innocence Project formed, and they put through a law. They advocated for a law, and it eventually was accepted in Italy, that would reopen definitively convicted cases when an international court that was recognized by Italy ruled against their final ruling. And so what that looked like in my case was I appealed that slander charge, to the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court of Human Rights ruled in my favor. They recognized that I was not given an attorney, that I was not given an interpreter, and therefore my statements that were the result of that deceptive, illegal interrogation should never have been used against me in a charge for slander. And so I brought that ruling back to Italy, to Italy's highest court, and very, very recently, just last month, they ruled in my favor and overturned my conviction for slander. They didn't definitively acquit me. What they did is they asked for me to have the opportunity to have a retrial. So while I am no longer a convict, which is great, I'm back to being a defendant. And it's a little surreal to be back in that space again. But I plan on pursuing justice to the fullest extent that I can. And I hope that ultimately I will be acquitted, and really this whole thing could be put behind me.
Will you go back to Florence, where this is going to be tried again?
I mean, this is a whole thing that I have to discuss with my attorneys and all of that. But what I can say right now is, yes, I am prepared to stand up for myself in a court in Italy.
For some of us, that sounds like something that you would never even consider after everything you've been through.
It's not my cup of tea, I'll tell you that, but it's the right thing to do. And I want to show that not only do I have faith that the Italian criminal justice system can eventually get it right, but that I'm not afraid, and that I'm in this for the long haul to do what is right and to demand what is right.
And to clear your name once and for all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When will all of that happen?
I don't know. I'm still waiting.
But at least you have the opportunity. This
Absolutely.
16 years later.
Yep. I never thought that I would have this opportunity, and it's in large part thanks to the Italy Innocence Project that I even have this opportunity at all. So I'm deeply, deeply indebted and grateful to them.
My last question, and I hope I have everything in here that I wanted to ask. If I don't, I'll just circle back. So now that you're 36 years old, I am curious what 36-year-old Amanda would say to her 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now about life, opportunity, experience, resilience.
I had conversations with younger versions of myself while I was in my prison cell. It sounds kind of crazy, but when I was in prison, I imagined a younger version of myself who wasn't yet going through what I was going through. And I would explain to her what was going to happen and how she was going to get through it. And I didn't know that I was going to get through it. Today I do. And I think the thing that I would want 20-year-old Amanda to know is that she's not alone. Because I felt so alone during those years. And what I've found in my life and in my work today, my husband and I have a podcast called Labyrinths. I've been doing this series for the Waking Up app where I'm writing about resilience. All of that has been a result of having told my story and finding that it resonates with others, and that truly I am not alone in my experience of having been exploited and gaslit and imprisoned even. And there's a whole world of people out there who care. And I didn't know that. And, I knew that my family and my friends cared, but I really, truly thought that I was never going to be able to belong to the greater humanity again, ever. And I feel deeply connected to the world today, despite the judgment that was put on me, in part because of the judgment that was put on me during these most delicate and vulnerable years of my life. So.
And you have made quite a life
Thank
for
you.
yourself.
Thank you.
Family, husband, career.
Yeah.
You really have.
I've worked really hard and I've been really lucky, and I'm just so grateful. And I know that I feel lucky. If you think about it, if you really think about it, if I hadn't met Raffaele that, a few days before this crime occurred, I would have been home and I might have been murdered too. It's just a fluke. And my friend was murdered. She died. And how many people who are wrongly convicted in this country spend 10, 20, 30, 40 years in prison before their crimes are, before the crime is realized that they didn't do it. And I only spent 4 years in prison and 8 years on trial. Compared, I'm lucky. Comparatively, I'm lucky. Yeah. Wow. So I truly feel like I'm a lucky person, and I'm grateful for what I've been able to accomplish today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I hope that didn't